If you look just about anywhere on social media, on YouTube, any content that is centered on or around homemaking, you might find that people are constantly telling you to do more and to do things differently. And I hope to be self-reflective enough to know that even my own content might put that message out there. But I, as a homemaker, have a lot of concerns about how much we are asking women and mothers to do in the day-to-day. Not only do we have to make food from scratch and clean and do laundry, there's also pressure to make sure that everything we make is clean and organic, and that we homeschool, and that we start a garden and preserve food, and also maybe even have a little side project or a side gig. And also, don't forget, you have to be healthy and exercise and find time for yourself too, mama. And in the midst of all that, you also have to have a perfectly decorated house. As I have transitioned into homemaking, I have felt a lot of concern about how much we are asking homemakers to do. And I think it's worth the conversation. Are we asking homemakers to do too much? And when is enough enough? Now, I do want to offer the disclaimer that I understand that everyone has a different threshold, and what might be too much for me might be almost nothing for you. So this is not packaged with any sort of judgment or criticism. This is really just a conversation to be had and maybe hopefully inspire a little bit of questioning about how we can find a little bit of balance or integration with our day-to-day of homemaking, but also set some boundaries for ourselves too. Feel free to just pop your headphones in and listen to this as you would a podcast, because today's video is just maybe a little bit different than the ones I have published in the past. In some ways, the onslaught of demands for homemakers is somehow a good thing. I think it's indicative of choice and opportunity and a changing world where mothers and women can choose to work from home, stay at home, do a little bit of both. And so in some ways, I don't even really want to put out the idea that this is a bad thing, because I think that choices are great and choices are important. But where I think this becomes really complicated is that these choices are also born of a broken system. We are making the choice to cook from scratch because we have a broken food system, and many people are choosing to homeschool because we have a complicated school structure, and many people are choosing to preserve their own food because the price of food is completely out of control, and again, the food system is broken. So all these things that we're choosing to do, they're good in a lot of ways, but we're doing them because the other resources, the other parts of our community that should really weave the fabric of our lives are fraying. And so where the system, whatever that may be, or our communities or social structures are failing us, often women, mothers, and homemakers have to pick up that slack. And it is a big burden and a lot to carry on your shoulders. So it begs the question, when is it enough, and is it already too much? Now, I don't have the answers for this, and I definitely don't have the solution. And I really think the solution will be different for every single person. It is very individual and very personal. So nothing I have to say has to be implied that you need to do it. This is more of a conversation about what I am experiencing and the way I am handling this in my own life. If you are watching the video that's accompanying this voiceover today, I am cleaning my kitchen cabinets, which is something I almost never do because I just don't care enough. Now, sometimes they do get dirty and they do need to be cleaned, but my guess is I probably clean these seasonally. And that is enough for me. And I think that is one of the key words here, enough. I like to listen to the podcast Frugal Friends podcast. If you haven't listened to it, you should check it out. I'll leave a link for it in the description box below. But on a recent episode of Frugal Friends, they were talking about defining your enough. What is enough for you? And I think we can look at this on a micro and a macro level. On the micro level, it is enough for me to clean my cabinets once a season. It is enough for me to make sure most of my dishes are done before I go to bed. It is enough for me to get my laundry washed and dried and sometimes folded almost never put away. That is enough for me. But on a macro level, I also have to question, what is enough for me? Is it enough for me to stay home and cook and clean and not do anything else? It's not. My brain needs a different type of stimulation. So what is enough for me is partially homemaking, cooking, cleaning, being with my family, because I love that, making that about 80 to 90% of what I do. But it truly isn't enough to keep my brain stimulated. I need something else to fill that enough. What I do right now is I make content and I write blogs as a way to think critically about the work that I'm doing, to build a small business and earn a little bit of income, and to provide service. Service has always been an important part of my life. I was a teacher and a yoga teacher, and so I want to take these skills and serve them to others outside of my home too. And that is enough for me. But for some people, that might be way too much. I only have one child, so it's easy for me to have a little bit of extra time and space often to be able to create these things. And I don't homeschool, so I have these pockets of time to fill that enough for me. But what concerns me often is that when I look at content, and I don't think anyone is doing this maliciously, I think it is well-meaning most of the time, there is a pressure to always do more. And this idea that what is enough for me should also be enough for you. And that can pile on the work. I think it's important to be very honest with yourself about what you are capable of, what you are good at, and what really is enough for you. There is a big movement right now for homeschooling, which is totally fine. I have nothing against homeschooling, but it's not the right choice for me. I'm not even joking. If I were homeschooling my kid, I would seriously be like, hey, let's learn 4 letters today, HGTV. I would literally do nothing. It is not a good choice for me, and that is okay. I am doing right by my child. I'm doing right for my family and right for myself by being honest that that is not my skill set, which is kind of hilarious because I was a teacher, but I was a teacher for adults, not small children. So it's just not the right fit for me, and that is okay. And that fulfills my enough. That is enough for me. The more tangible you can make your enough, or the more tangible you can define your enough, the easier I think it is to work within those boundaries you set for yourself. So if you say to yourself, I am going to mop my floors every 2 weeks, and I am going to clean my cabinets once a season, and I am going to make sure that my laundry is washed and dry, but I don't care if it's put away. And I'm gonna cook every meal from scratch except for 2 meals a week. Those sorts of things, having that really clear sense of what your enough is, makes it easier to get those things done because you've set the boundaries for yourself and you know that once that task is done, you can move on to the next thing because you have fulfilled your enough. I want to talk about non-negotiables too, but before we transition into that part of the conversation, I really think we need to talk about social media for a second. There are a lot of great content makers out there whom I follow, but if you are following anyone on social media, even if it's me, and they make you feel like you are not doing enough and you are not doing things right, unfollow them. The people that we interact with, the content that we engage with should inspire us, but not make us feel like we are doing things wrong or we are not doing them well enough. I was following someone on Instagram. It was actually just a gardening account because one of my goals for the year is to grow 50% of my family's vegetables. And I was following this Instagram gardening account. And at first I thought the content was really great because there were some helpful tips. But then the content became very shaming. If you're doing it this way, you're basically killing the entire environment. If you're doing it this way, you're poisoning your children. I'm not even saying that what she was saying was wrong, but it did not leave me feeling inspired to do better. It kind of made me feel bad that I didn't have the resources, the time, or the knowledge to be able to do it differently. So that person has to go. I'm talking about this in the context of content because that's just the example that I have recently, but this is true for anything. If what you are surrounding yourself with is constantly telling you to do things better or differently in a way that does not feel inspiring, it's got to go. Okay, so we also need to talk about non negotiables though, because if we're talking about setting boundaries around what is enough, we do have to also put in place some things that really are non negotiables because we can't just trim the fat on every single thing. Sometimes I think the non negotiables are a little bit out of our control. They are set by things like our family needs and budget. The non negotiable for some people is they have to work outside the home to make enough money to support their family. That is non negotiable. Or for some people, it is non negotiable that they can't go to work because they don't make enough money to afford daycare. So sometimes these things are completely out of our control. And I worry sometimes about the push in either direction that women and mothers and homemakers face. That if you are working outside the home full time, you're not being a good enough mom because you're not home. But if you are working at home and you are a homemaker, for example, you're not living up to your full potential. And I do have a lot of concerns about how homemakers and women and mothers basically just can't make the right decision. Now, of course, they can make the right decision for themselves, and what the outside world has to say about it shouldn't matter, but there is influence and there's a push and there's a lot of judgment coming from a lot of directions. So when it comes to non-negotiables, I can really only talk about this from my perspective and my life because what my non-negotiables are don't even really represent what yours will probably be. For me, at this phase in this season of my life, I have a few non-negotiables. A non-negotiable right now is I am trying to cook 80% of my family's food from scratch. Technically, I'd like to do a little bit more, but I just understand that given our lifestyle and how busy we are, sometimes I just got to run through Chick-fil-A. My kid will eat the chicken nuggets. I think a chicken sandwich is really good. So a non-negotiable for me at the moment is about 80% scratch-made food with the flexibility to run through the drive-thru if I need to, go out to eat, or some other option like a takeout or something like that. Another non-negotiable in my life right now is my content. I am building my content as a small business. I publish 2 blogs and 2 YouTube videos a week, and I set the goal to do that for at least 1 year just to see how it goes. And it is a non-negotiable. So I am letting other things go so I can fulfill that part of my life that I feel is a non-negotiable right now. And like I said before, I think this also works on a micro and a macro level. There are these big non-negotiable things that we have. For some people, it's homeschooling. For some people, it's scratch cooking. For some people, it might be some other form of education like Montessori education or something like that. And though I think talking about non-negotiables is more complicated than the binary of yes and no, an easy way to think about the non-negotiables is, will I say yes to this or no to that? And when we are saying yes to one thing, we are saying no to something else. And we are saying no to one thing, we're saying yes to something else. When I say yes to cooking from scratch, I am also saying no to a whole lot of cleaning. And when I say no to cleaning my baseboards, which is almost always a no, I am saying yes to having time to write my blogs and work on my video content. So when we understand our non-negotiables, it can become easier to say yes and no to the things that matter and the things that we want to say yes and no to. Now, as I'm getting older, I'll be 42 this year, I am getting a lot better at saying no at things. But I constantly want to say yes to life because I want to do all the things. I want a clean house. I want homemade food. I want a huge garden. I want to spend time with my family. I want a job. Of course, I want to do all of these things. But the reality is we can't say yes to everything all the time and we can't say no to everything all the time. So we have to find some sort of middle ground. And that is where I think the non-negotiables come into play. Saying yes to the things that we just have to do to live our best lives and no to the things that really just don't matter that much to us. And really at the heart, probably this is the same as defining your enough, but it's another way of framing that thought process. If everything is enough and everything is non-negotiable, it is exhausting, and it can feel that we have to do it all, and it can feel like everything is a non-negotiable. But for sure, these things change in time. When I was younger, it was just a lot easier for me to get a lot of things done. I didn't have my first child and my only child until I was 38 years old. So what was enough for me and the non-negotiables almost felt kind of endless because I had so much time. But as I have been getting older and I have a small child and I'm building a business, I have really had to parse out what is enough for me and what is non-negotiable. And it turns out a lot of things are just not as important as I once thought they were. So that brings me to my next point, is to have some sort of flexibility, because life ebbs and flows and changes. And I always knew that, but I did not know how much it can change and how quickly it can change until I had a child. I swear, motherhood in a nutshell. Someone said this to me once on Facebook and they hit the nail on the head. It is constantly finding your groove, and as soon as you get into it, it changes. And I hear a lot about balance, right? That we should find balance in the things that we do. And I do agree that balance is important, but I encourage you to think about balance differently, because to balance inevitably means we are going to fall. So if someone's balancing on a tightrope or balancing, say, on a ball, they might be able to sit there for a while, but they eventually will fall. Integration is another way I like to think about these things. How can I integrate my enough? How can I integrate my changing non-negotiables into my life in a way that offers me flexibility and the ability to move and change with the natural and constant ebb and flow of life? Of course, this will look different for everyone, but for me, over the last year, I have tried to integrate habits in my life that fit my needs. So right now, this is just a small example. I have tried to integrate baking homemade bread into my regular routine because one of the goals I set was to fully 100% make all of my family's bread, which I have done for the last year. But that also came with experimentation and understanding how to integrate that in a way that works for my lifestyle. And that goal has had to change a little bit. So even though I'm still making my family's bread, in the beginning, for example, I was doing tons of no-knead rustic sourdough. But lately, I have not really had the time for that, which is kind of funny because I am making that in this video, but I had family in town, so I was doing something special that day. But I have been making sourdough breads that are easier to make, like enriched doughs that are mixed up in my mixer and that don't require any hands-on time at all after I mix them. But really, I know this is an inconsequential example, but what I hope to underscore is that we can move with the ebb and flow and have flexibility with what is enough or what is or isn't non-negotiable in ways that work for us in the moment and in particular seasons of our lives. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. It just has to be flexible and integrated in a way that works for us. I saw this article in the news many years ago about these screaming groups for moms, where moms meet and they go outside and they scream to let go of their frustration. And the article was kind of making light of it and kind of cracking jokes at it. But that's not funny. It's not funny that women and mothers and homemakers are feeling this way. I don't have the answers, and I definitely don't have the solutions. I can't even completely pinpoint the problem because I think there are a lot of problems. But what I do know is that women, mothers, and homemakers are exhausted, and we are being asked to do so much. And I hope after all of this, you find that you don't have to do it all, and I think you're doing a great job.